The wind had turned bitter overnight. Frost clung to the edges of the barn door, catching the first gray of morning like ash on old wood. Clara stood still in it, one hand pressed to her belly, the other wrapped tight around her son's wool cap. She had not meant to leave it on the nail by the door, but she had been tired last night, bone tired. She stared at it now like it might answer something. Behind her, the house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that settled in a place when laughter had long since left, when the walls forgot what it sounded like to hold joy. The fire had gone out in the stove some time before dawn, and her breath puffed in little clouds. She didn't light it. There was not much left to burn. Nathan's cough had come back in the night, dry and thin. It had taken Samuel in late spring, that same cough growing from the chest like brambles, until there was no breath left to hold. She had buried him behind the house, under the cottonwood tree that still dropped its white ghosts in the wind. Clara wrapped the cap into her coat pocket and stepped out into the yard. The frozen dirt cracked beneath her boots. The sky was low and metallic, with just a flicker of red on the edge of the east. It looked like a wound, half minus healed and aching. She tilted her head to it. "Just one good day," she whispered. "Not a prayer. Just a wish sent to nothing." Her fingers were raw from milking, her back stiff from hauling water since the pump froze up 2 nights ago. The chickens were too lean to bother with now. The cow needed selling. The pantry held only 2 jars of beans, 1 sack of flour, and a tin of lard with a rusted lid. The letter from the bank lay folded 3 times on the kitchen table. It had arrived last week, smelling of cold ink in Chicago. They wanted the land back, or the money. She had neither. She had tried everything. Sewing for neighbors, scrubbing floors for a family in town whose boy liked to glare at her when he thought no one saw. She'd sold her wedding ring last winter for feed. It hadn't lasted long. Nothing did anymore. A cry came from the house, high and hoarse. Nathan. He was 3, and the sickness had sunk in deep. Clara's feet didn't move. Her hand trembled in her pocket, gripping its small wool cap like it could anchor her to the earth. She thought of walking, just walking, leaving the house, the land, the trees, and the cold behind, going until her legs gave out or the land swallowed her whole. There were stories whispered in town of women who did, who just disappeared into the brush. No note, no scream, just silence. Some said coyotes got them. Some said worse, but her body didn't budge, even as the wind sliced through her, opened into her skin, even as the weight of grief wrapped tight around her ribs. Her feet stayed planted in the cold dirt of a life that had not been fair and would not be kind, but was still hers. She turned and stepped back inside. The baby was crying now too, hungry. Ruth was only 9 months old and had never known a full stomach. Clara's milk had dried up early, and the goat had gone dry after the frost took all the greens. She reached for the tin of lard and a cloth, dipped the corner and unlet the baby suckle. It was something, a trick the midwife taught her when she still had neighbors. By the time both children were quiet, the sun had lifted just enough to cut a line of silver across the floorboards. Clara stood in it, her shoulders slumped, her hair falling loose from its braid. She had not looked in a mirror in weeks. Then came the knock, 3 times, slow. Son, not a man from the bank. They would send a letter, not a hand. Not this early. She reached for the old shotgun, unloaded and nearly forgotten behind the door. Her fingers didn't tremble this time. She opened it, and there he stood, a man wrapped in a wool coat too big for him, dust minus covered in sun minus beaten, with a scar just below his lip and eyes like unsettled storm clouds. He didn't speak at first. Just looked at her, looked past her, then back again. "My horse is down," he said finally. "Through a shoe. Saw the smoke from your chimney." She didn't move. "I've got coin," he added. Still, she said nothing. She was not afraid, just empty and wary. That was different. The man shifted his weight, nodded toward the barn. "I can work if you've got room." Clara stepped back from the door just a little, not because she trusted him, not because she wanted help, but because she could no longer afford to turn away anything that knocked. He slept in the barn that night, beneath a fraying wool blanket he carried himself, curled up beside the mare he led limping into the yard. Clara had watched him through the window long after the house had gone still, arms crossed tight over her chest, the smell of smoking cold beans still clinging to her sleeve. He hadn't asked to come inside. She hadn't offered. That at least felt like a kind of agreement. In the morning he was already chopping wood. The thud of the axe echoed across the yard like a clock, steady and sure. She watched from the porch, Ruth on her hip, Nathan curled at her feet with the blanket trapped around his shoulders. The man had taken his coat off, sleeves rolled past the elbow. His arms were lean but strong, the kind of strong made from habit, not pride. He stacked each piece carefully by the door before starting again. "Name's Elias," he said at last without turning. "Elias Greeley." She didn't answer. Not right away. Clara set Ruth down and stepped past the porch rail, her boots crunching frost. "You do this everywhere you go?" she asked. He stopped then, wiped his brow. "Do what?" "Show up and start fixing things." Elias looked up, met her eyes. There was something quiet in him. Not soft exactly, just settled. Only when it's broke. That night, she gave him stew. Watery, barely seasoned but hot. She didn't eat. Said she already had some earlier. He didn't argue. Nathan sat close to him, eyes wide. "You got a gun?" he asked. Elias nodded once. "Left it with the saddle. You ever shoot somebody?" Clara moved quick, flicking the back of Nathan's head. "Mind your tongue." But Elias didn't seem rattled. He just shrugged. "Only when I had to." Nathan considered that like it was the most honest thing he'd heard in his life. Later, after the children had been laid down and the fire banked, Clara stood at the door again, arms folded. "You said you'd pay," she said. "I did." She didn't want his money. Not really. But something about having the upper hand helped her breathe. "I ain't looking for charity," Elias said. "I just needed a place to get her patched up." He nodded toward the barn. "Got a bit of metal in my saddlebag. Can show her myself come morning." She nodded, half-turned, then stopped. "There's a fence out past the creek that needs fixing. If you're set on paying your way." He tipped his head. "He'll see to it." She shut the door. Not quite gentle, not quite hard. By the third day, H.E.D. fixed the fence, cleaned the chimney, and hauled water from the frozen stream without being asked. He moved with the rhythm of a man used to waiting. Not aimless, just slow in a way that let the land speak first. Clara had known men who balked orders, who thought working the land made them better than it. Elias was one of them. He slept in the barn each night without complaint, even when the frost thickened and the boards groaned in the wind. She left a blanket on the porch rail one evening, didn't say a word. The next morning it was gone. They spoke more now, about small things, the cold, the cow's milk finally returning. I Fox seen near the henhouse. Not about his past, not about hers, but she began to see things. The way he paused before lifting Nathan onto the porch, like he was weighing something. The way he stared out at the cottonwood tree too long. The way his hand lingered over a thin leather book he kept in his coat pocket but never opened. One night, with the fire low and the wind howling through the gaps in the window frame, she sat across from him at the table, nursing the last of the coffee. "You got folks somewhere?" she asked. Elias rubbed the back of his neck. "Had a brother once. Fought down in Texas. Never came back." She waited. "My father was a preacher," he added, softer. "Herd man. Believed pain made a man holy." Clara didn't respond, just sipped her coffee. She knew the kind. He looked up. "You?" She shook her head. No one left. Silence settled between them. Not heavy, not light. Ruth stirred in her sleep. The fire pup. Somewhere out in the dark, a coyote called. "You ever think of leaving?" he asked. "All the time," she said. "But it keeps not happening." He nodded like that made perfect sense. Clara stood, picked up the tin cups. "Sleep well, Elias." "Clara," he said quietly before she turned. She looked back. "Thanks for not turning me out." She gave him a long look. Not soft, but not cold either. "I didn't do it for you." He nodded again, like that too. He understood. "The ride isn't over yet. Subscribe now." The days grew longer but not warmer. Snow came in late November, light at first, then heavy. It blanketed the world in silence, turning the trees brittle and the fields to glass. Clara moved through it with a kind of grace that looked nothing like ease. Her shoulders had learned the shape of burden, but her hands still worked as if hope might be coaxed out of the land like milk from a dry udder. Elias stayed, not because she asked. She hadn't, but he fixed things before they broke, learned where the water froze deepest, mended the barn roof in the bitter cold with torn gloves and quiet determination. And when Nathan's cough returned sharp, racking, the kind that echoed through the thin walls, Elias stayed up with him so Clara could sleep. She found them once, just before dawn, Elias seated on the floor beside the boy's cot, humming something low and tuneless. Nathan slept, finally. Elias did not. She didn't say anything, just watched, then went and made coffee strong enough to burn. There were days they didn't speak much, but the silence shifted. It became less of a wall and more of a blanket trough, familiar shared. She taught him how to salt pork, how to stretch a meal with dried apples and cornmeal, how to wash clothes without tearing them to rags. He showed her how to dress a wound on the mare's flank, how to mend the rifle bolt, how to listen for snow before it fell. Once, when the storm was too strong to work outside, he carved Ruth a small horse from scrap wood, held it out without a word. The baby took it with both hands and began chewing the tail. Clara laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt like something broke open. That night she found the wooden horse left on the windowsill facing east. The lamp pressed in harder after that. The snow came heavier. The roof began to leak near the stove. The cow went lame. Nathan grew thin. The letter from the bank returned, stamped final. Clara sat at the table long after the children were asleep, her hands in her lap, the fire just coals. Elias stood behind her, silent. "I won't lose this place," she said finally. "It's all I have left." "I know." She looked up at him, and for the first time didn't try to hide the crack in her voice. "They'll take it. The land, the house, everything." Elias leaned against the doorframe, his face shattered. "How much is left?" She didn't want to say it, but she did. $3. Maybe 4 if I count the old silver fork. He nodded. Thought for a long time. "I've got coin," he said again. "Not much, but enough to buy you time." Her face tightened. "I don't want your money." "I know." He stepped forward, slow and sure. "But maybe I could help in another way." She stood now wary. "What kind of way?" Elias met her eyes. "A marriage makes the claim stronger. Legally, bank won't force out a working couple with 2 young ones. Not if there's a man tied to the land." Her heart thudded like something caught in a trap. "That's not a reason to marry." "No," he said, "but sometimes reasons come after." She stared at him, waiting for some sign of cruelty or trickery. She saw none. "I won't be owned," she said. "I wouldn't know how to own you if I tried." The fire gave one final crack before dying to ash. He turned, gave her space. "Think on it," he said. "It'll be in the barn." She didn't sleep that night. She sat with her back against the wall, knees tucked up, Ruth curled in her lap like a kitten. The wind howled. The letter sat on the table like a sentence waiting to be read again. By morning, she had an answer. Not one she felt certain of, but one she could live with. When she stepped into the barn, Elias was already brushing the mare. "You'll do it," she said. He turned, waited. "But it'll be honest. No lies. Just 2 people trying to make something hold." "That's more than most," he said. Clara took a breath. It filled her lungs with cold and high and quiet. "I got no white dress. No preacher. Just a Bible and a kitchen table." Elias smiled, small and drear. "That'll do." They stood across from each other that Sunday morning, hands bare, faces worn, breath misting in the cold air of the kitchen. Nathan sat at the table, legs swinging. Ruth lay in a woven basket nearby, wrapped tight in the old quilt Clara's mother once stitched before the war took her brothers. The Bible sat open between them, its spine cracked, pages yellowing like old wheat. Clara read the words slow, voice steady but quiet. "Love is patient," she said, eyes not leaving the page. "Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast." Her voice faltered for just a moment, then picked back up. "It is not proud." Elias didn't speak. He just listened, his hat held against his chest, his fingers rough and still. The light from the window caught the gray in his hair and the small scar that curved near his jaw. When she finished, she looked up. "That's all I got," she said. Elias nodded once. "It's enough." They didn't kiss. There were no rings, no vows beyond the look they shared. But Nathan clapped his hands, grinning wide. Does this mean G.S. my paw now? Clara's mouth twitched, almost a smile. She touched Nathan's hair. No, but hell help raise you. That night they ate boiled potatoes and onions with salt, and Elias said grace for the first time in years. Not the words he'd learned it in church as a boy, but something simpler. Thank you for the roof, he said, for the hands at this table, and the chance to start again. After the children slept, Clara handed him a folded shirt, clean, patched at the sleeve. You can sleep inside now, she said, avoiding his eyes. He took it. I won't touch you, he said softly. Not unless you ask. She looked at him then, full minus on. I know. They slept in the same room, but on separate cots. The fire burned low. Her breathing was slow and even, but she did not sleep. Neither did he. In the weeks that followed, people began to talk. In town, at the feed store, on church steps. Some said Clara Whitlock had married out of desperation. Others said Elias Greeley was trouble-drifted through a dozen towns, left none better than he found them. Clara didn't answer back. She had stopped caring what people thought the same day the dirt fell on Samuel's coffin and no one stayed behind to help shovel. Elias, though, bore it all with a strange calm. He walked with Nathan into town one morning, head high, coat mended, boy gripping his hand like it belonged there. At the mercantile, old Mr. Ransom raised an eyebrow. You're the new husband, then? Elias didn't bristle, just nodded. Helping on the land, Ransom grunted. That widow's seen enough hard times. Elias met his gaze. That's why I stayed. He bought flowers, salt, and a jar of hard candy for the boy, left without fuss. Clara noticed that people started looking at her different. Not kinder, but more like a woman who wouldn't break no matter how much the wind tried. She planted onions and beans in the thaw. Elias mended the west fence. Nathan's cough lessened with the warming weather. Ruth stood for the first time near the hearth, arms out, laughing. One evening, Clara found Elias in the barn with the Bible open in his lap. Didn't think you were the praying kind, she said. He looked up. Imna, just remembering what it felt like. She stepped inside, leaned against the doorpost. You miss it. Not the words, just the part where you believed someone was listening. She was quiet for a long time. Then maybe someone is. Maybe it's just us. Elias closed the Bible gently. That'd be enough. Outside, the air smelled of turned earth and old hay. A storm gathered low on the horizon, dark and heavy. But for now, the wind was still. Inside, the light held. The storm came hard. Rain first, thick and cold, then sleet, then snow again, though it was late enough in spring that it shouldn't have. The roof held barely. Elias stayed up through the night, shifting pots beneath leaks, stoking the fire to keep the chill from the children's bones. Clara moved between the beds, pressing cool cloths to Ruth's burning forehead. The baby had taken sick in the night, and her cries came weak now, fading to a rasp. By morning the wind had stripped branches from the trees, and the creek out back had spilled over, dragging away part of the fence Elias had just repaired. They stood at the window, watching the damage. Well, fix it, Clara said, though her voice lacked its usual steel. Elias nodded, but she could tell he was thinking of the same thing. She was if the cow made it through, if the feed would hold, if Ruth's fever would break. That evening Ruth's breath came shallow, her small chest rising slow, then stalling. Clara held her close to the fire, whispering things the baby wouldn't understand, but maybe the world would hear. Nathan stood in the doorway, chewing the end of his sleeve. Elias came in from the cold, hair wet, hands red and dry from hauling wood. He saw her face and knelt beside her without a word. You think she'll make it? Clara asked, voice like paper. Elias looked at Ruth, pale and still, then at Clara. I don't know, he said. She didn't cry, but she gripped the baby tighter, her fingers white on the quilt. Elias rose, left the room, returned with the wooden horse he'd carved months ago. He set it by Ruth's side. Maybe she'll remember, he said softly. That night, Clara sat with Ruth pressed to her chest and hummed a lullaby she hadn't sung since Samuel died. Elias sat across from her, not speaking, not sleeping, just keeping watch. By dawn, the fever broke. The baby opened her eyes, slow and blinking like light hurt her. But she looked at her mother. She looked at Elias. And then she slept. Clara didn't speak. She just bent her head and let herself breathe again. 2 days later, the sun returned. Weak, but there. Elias went back to the fence. Clara began laying out what little seeds she had left. Nathan followed Elias like a shadow now, learning to hammer nails and split kindling. Ruth took to crawling toward the door, drawn to the warmth of the sun, her hair a mess of fine curls. One afternoon, as Elias dug a post-minus hole near the edge of the cottonwood, Clara brought him water. She stood beside him in the wind, quiet for a long while. "You never said why you came through here," she said. Elias paused, wiped his brow. "I was heading north," he said. "Thought I had family there." "Did you?" He shook his head. "No one worth finding." She watched him for a moment. "And now?" He met her eyes. "Now I've found something better." The wind moved around them, gentle for once. That night, after the children were asleep, Clara sat at the table, Elias across from her. She reached into the small tin box she kept on the mantel and pulled out what remained of her wedding ring, the one she had sold, then bought back with part of Elias's coin without telling him. It was bent, worn thin, the gold dull from use and time. "I kept this," she said, laying it between them. Elias looked at it, then at her. "Why?" "Because I never wanted to forget where I came from," she said, "even if it hurt." He reached out, not for the ring, but for her hand. He held it gently, his thumb brushing the base of her fingers where a ring once was. "You don't have to forget," he said. Clara nodded. "But maybe it's time to begin again." He took the ring and slipped it onto her finger, not because it was new, but because it was still hers. She let him. And this time, when the fire burned low and the wind pressed soft against the windows, they didn't sleep on separate cots. They lay beside each other, not speaking, not rushing, just breathing the same air, letting the past settle while the future waited outside, quiet and whole. Spring came for good that year. Not all at once, but in shy gestures. The creek ran clear again, the thaw bled into the soil, and shoots of green pushed through earth that had known too many winters. The cottonwood bloomed slow and quiet, its buds trembling like they weren't sure they were allowed to live. Clara moved through the days lighter now, not without weight, but with more balance. Her eyes still searched the horizon each morning, as if waiting for the land to take something back, but it didn't. Not this time. Elias built a new pen for the chickens, fitted the door just right so even the clever ones couldn't escape. Nathan followed him everywhere with a slingshot in his pocket and too many questions on his tongue. Ruth began walking. Her first steps were crooked, unsteady, arms flailing like a bird learning how to land. Clara caught her just before she hit the stove. They both laughed, one from joy, the other from disbelief. Later that evening, Elias carved a second horse. Smaller than the first, smoother. He handed it to Clara without explanation. "Show on one of her own," he said. Clara ran her fingers over the grain. "You're getting better." He gave a half smile. "Had a good teacher." She didn't ask who. She'd learned not to press for things that took time. That night they sat outside after the children had gone to bed, wrapped in one quilt, staring at the stars. The kind of quiet between them was new, no longer survival, but something earned. Clara leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. "I didn't think I'd get to feel this again," she said. Elias looked up at the dark, his voice slow. "Me neither." She sat up after a while, hands in her lap. The moon lit her face just enough to show the old scar near her jaw, faint but there, like something healed drawn. "I still dream of him," she said. "Of Samuel. Sometimes HES just working in the yard, and I wake up thinking HES still out there." Elias didn't flinch. "That makes sense. You ever dream of yours?" He nodded slowly. "My brother, my mother, sometimes the war. I wake up and can't move." She reached for his hand. "I'm not trying to replace anyone," she said. "I know," he said, squeezing her fingers. "You couldn't if you tried." They sat quiet again, and in that silence something settled between them. Not a promise. Not yet. but an understanding, like roots finding hold into the frost line. The next week, a letter came from the bank. Clara stood at the edge of the porch when Elias returned from town, envelope in hand. She didn't open it right away, just held it like a fragile thing. "You want to know?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, I want to live like it's already good news." But she opened it anyway. It wasn't what she expected. Not a demand, not a threat, just a notice the account had been paid in full. No further action required. She stared at the words. "Did you?" she began, turning to him. Elias shook his head. "Only gave what you told me to. Nothing more." She looked again, then read the fine print. A payment had come from the neighboring town, from the woman whose floors Clara once scrubbed, from the man whose wife Clara helped deliver in a storm 3 years back, from 2 others. Small amounts pooled together. "They helped," she said, her voice thin. "They remembered," Elias said. Clara pressed the letter to her chest. "I thought I was forgotten," she whispered. Elias wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin against her shoulder. "Not everyone forgets a good woman." She wept then. First time in months. Not from grief, from relief. From the staggering weight of being seen and saved by people she'd thought had turned away. They fixed up the house that summer. New shingles, fresh paint. Clara taught Ruth how to plant carrots. Nathan built a scarecrow, proud as a rooster. Elias carved spoons and butter paddles and sold them in town, refusing to take more than he was owed. The land stayed quiet, mostly, but no longer cool. That autumn, Clara found out she was carrying again. She told Elias in the early morning, while he was shaving by the window, eyes squinting into the sunrise. He looked at her, still holding the blade in his hand. "You sure?" She nodded, eyes wide and full. He exhaled, slow and shaky, and then he smiled. Not the half-minded smile he gave the world. A full one, straight and clean, like the first clear day after a long winter. They didn't speak after that. They didn't have to. The first snow came early that year. Not heavy, just enough to dust the fields and hush the land. Clara watched it fall from the kitchen window, one hand on her belly, the other wrapped around a mug of hot chicory. The baby moved beneath her ribs, slow, steady, like it already knew the rhythm of this place. The stove clinked as the fire settled. Nathan was out gathering kindling with Elias. Ruth napped in the corner, curled like a kitten in her basket. Clara didn't say it aloud, but she felt it in her bones things were holding. Later they all sat at the table, eating cornbread and bean soup. Elias had brought back molasses from town. Nathan nearly tipped the tin trying to get every last drop. Ruth smeared it in her hair and laughed like she'd discovered gold. Elias reached over, wiped her face with a clean corner of his sleeve. Clara caught the movement and smiled, not because it was remarkable, but because it wasn't anymore. After supper, Elias took out the new cradle he'd built. Simple pine, sanded smooth. He ran his hand over the rails, as if still unsure it was real. "You ever build one before?" Clara asked. He looked up. "Once." She waited, but he didn't say more. He never did unless he wanted to. She knelt beside it, ran her palm along the edge. "It's good work." He reached over, touched her shoulder lightly. "It's for both of us, not just the baby." She nodded. Words caught in her throat. There was still fear. Of course there was. The world had taken enough from her that she didn't trust peace without suspicion. But it didn't feel fragile the way it used to. What they were building, this life, it had weight to it now. That night they lay in bed with the fire low, the room warm, the sound of wind pressing gently against the walls. Clara turned onto her side, eyes on the cradle. "Do you think it'll be a boy or a girl?" Elias didn't open his eyes. "Either one, I'll be just fine." She smiled into the dark. Ruth stirred once, then still. Nathan coughed in his sleep, the sound softer now, like a memory more than a threat. In the morning, Elias saddled the mare and rode east to barter for winter feed. Clara stood on the porch, shawl around her shoulders, belly full beneath her dress, Ruth pressed to her hip. Nathan waved from beside the fence, mouth full of biscuit. Elias tipped his hat as he rode off. "You'll be back before supper," Clara called. "Unless someone talks too long," he answered. She smiled, squinting into the pale light. He did return just before dusk, coat dusted white, eyes bright from the cold. He brought feed, new boots for Nathan, dried pears wrapped in cloth. When Clara reached for the bundle, their fingers brushed. They paused, her hand over his steady as ever. Neither said anything. They didn't need to. The land around them was changing. Snow gathering again in the corners of the fields. The cottonwood barren still, but inside the house there was warmth, light, breath. Later that week, Elias began carving something new. Not a horse, not a spoon, a ring. He never said it was for her. He didn't need to. He shaped it out of hickory, smoothed the inside, burned a line around the edge with the tip of his blade. It wasn't fancy, but it was beautiful. When he was finished, he brought it to her at the kitchen table. Clara looked at it in his palm, then up at him. "You already married me," she said. "I know," he said, "but this time I wanted to be your choice." She stared at him, heart pounding like it hadn't in years. Then she took the ring, slid it on her finger right over the place where the gold had once lived. She didn't cry. She just nodded, and he understood what that meant. They spent that winter together like it was the first one ever written. Long nights, shared breath, quiet hands. The snow was deep, but the house stayed warm. The pantry stayed full. And in March, the baby came. A girl. Clara held her beneath the cottonwood once the frost lifted, her back pressed to the trunk, the sky open above. Elias sat beside her, Nathan and Ruth playing in the grass. "She's got your eyes," he said. Clara looked down at the baby, then up at the land. "No," she said softly, "she's got a new start." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and for the first time in her life she didn't wonder how long the peace would last. It already had. Subscribe, and let the frontier unfold slowly.